there are certain important things that need to be considered, no, in diagnosing what we call the exanthematous diseases. Most of the exanthematous diseases are viral in origin. So what are the things that you need to consider? One would be exposure history. Exposure history meaning, was there a history of exposure, for example, to a sibling with measles, or an exposure to a neighbor with varicella? But not all, well, viral exanthematous diseases would really have that 100% exposure history. So meaning, it does not rule out the diagnosis of a viral exanthematous disease if you do not have the exposure history. Okay. Next is season. Season, because there are certain viruses that love the dry, wet season, or the dry or wet season, or dry or cold, or wet and cold season. For example, like for December, January, February, this would relatively be the colder months of the year. And then you might be having or starting to have your viral exanthems. But it can peak during the summer months, or for example, for dengue. Dengue would be more seen during the rainy season, but of course, as you will know later, no, as you read, no, and listen to the video, then you will learn that dengue is actually whole year round, although it peaks during the rainy season. And then what about age of the patient? So age of the patient, meaning if your diagnosis is roseola meaning it's a, well, you call it in layman's term, the baby measles, no? You won't expect a roseola in an adolescent because roseola is mostly found in infants, especially in the less than 2 years old. Or for example, if you have an adolescent or if you have a newborn, would you be expecting rubella, right? So there are certain diseases that would have a prevalence that is higher in certain age groups. And then history of previous exanthems. A lot of the exanthems would have lifelong immunity. So if you have had measles in the past, then it's very, very rare. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's very, very rare that you have a repeat measles. Also for varicella. But of course, there are viruses or viral infections that would be repeated, meaning, for example, dengue. Dengue has 4 strains. So in your lifetime, you can have 4 episodes of dengue. At siguro naman, when you reach the 4th episode, that dengue would actually be fatal already. Then another thing to consider in diagnosing exanthematous diseases would really be the relation of the rash to fever. And you would learn this in your video, if you listen to the video in our case discussion later on. No? So what would be the relation of rash to fever? Because there are certain viral exanthems or viral infections that would have, for example, fever first, and then the rashes appear. And once the rashes appear, the fever disappears. Or there are certain viral exanthems that would actually have the rash and the fever simultaneously or together, no? Or there may be other viral infections wherein as you progress with the rash, you also progress with the degree of the fever. A good thing also to remember in the diagnosis of exanthematous diseases would be the immunization history, because these viral exanthematous diseases, or some of them, would be what we call vaccine preventable diseases. Okay? So again, you will learn later in the case, and I will show you the immunization calendar, wherein, no, when you finish off the complete course of a vaccination series, then the likelihood of getting the infection is very low. Okay, so for example, if you're pretty sure that your patient has had 2 doses of MMR vaccine, then the likelihood of that patient getting measles, mumps, or rubella will be lesser. Of course, compared to a susceptible child who does not have any form of immunization. Now, in physical examination, there are also certain associated physical examination findings that are associated with certain viral exanthematous diseases. So for example, Koplik's spot is associated with measles. Forsheimer spots is associated with rubella. Or for example, a cervical lymphadenopathy with is more likely to be seen in patients with rubella. Okay. Or aseptic meningitis may be seen in mumps, no? And it can be part and parcel of a mumps with just a simple headache, but it is already an aseptic type of meningitis. Now, the type, distribution, and progression of the rash is very important for you to take note of. And the rashes may be classified into vesicular or papular or maculopapular. It can be discrete, meaning it's singles, the rashes are in singles, or it can be map-like, meaning the rashes are coalescent. Okay? Or the rashes can have like a desquamation later on. And the distribution of the rash is very important also, where the rashes would appear first. Or some of the rashes will go like progressively from head to foot. Or there are some rashes that would appear together in the whole body. Okay. So these are certain things. Now, all these things should be considered, and these are the things that you should be looking for when you would be diagnosing a viral, specifically a viral exanthematous disease. Okay. So, just to give an example, for example, for rubeola is your measles. So we say always that rubeola would have the classic 3 C's as the prodrome. The 3 C's would be your conjunctivitis, cough, and your coryza. Well, the fourth C sounding can be your Koplik spots that would be seen on your buccal mucosa. So as mentioned earlier on, your Koplik spots is your enanthem, right? Your rash is called your exanthem. A rash and the mucous membrane is called an enanthem. Okay? Now, rubella, on the other hand, would be your 3-day measles kasi it's just 3 day duration of the rash. And as mentioned earlier on, the rash that can be seen on the palate or on the mucous mucosa is your Forsheimer spot. So if you see those, then you're pretty sure, maybe I'm dealing with rubella. Okay? But rubella compared to measles would not have a prodrome, a very little prodrome. It would only be associated with just a little bit of headache, a low-grade fever, a little bit of a sore throat, a little bit of a rhinitis, compared to what your child will be experiencing in measles. Now, Roseola infantum, on the other hand, is a classic example of the relationship of rash to fever. Okay? And this is very characteristic of the course of illness of a Roseola infantum. This is what we call in Tagalog, tigdas hangin. No? If you're able to actually hear it from your lolos or your lolas, or even the parents that you were able to interview, Roseola infantum is called tigdas hangin. So what happens in Roseola infantum? Usually affect affecting children 6 months to 36 months, but usually less than 1 year old. No, this is caused by your human herpes virus 6, and onset is the fever. It's a high-grade fever. No? So imagine a parent going to the clinic, bringing an infant, usually less than 1 year old, with very high grade fever, usually 39 to 40 degrees. And that's why they're bringing the infant there. It's because they're scared of the high grade fever. Okay? But at that point in time, the baby would just have a little bit of cough and colds, a little bit of a decrease in appetite, but there's nothing there. Okay? Well, you may get your CBC, you may get your urinalysis, but there should be nothing there. Okay? But once the fever, but knowing this, no, you will be able to now advise the mommy, let's just wait 3 days, usually 3 days. After 3 days of high-grade fever, then we see there's a rash coming out after 3 days, then that is most likely tigdas hangin only. And when the rashes appear, mommy, the fever will disappear. Or the fever will start to lyse. Okay? And that is your classical tigdas hangin or roseola infantum. If that fever does not lyse with the appearance of the rash, then it is not, okay, definitely not roseola infantum. Okay? Okay. Now, type, distribution, rash, the character of the rash. Okay, so Chris and I want your help here. Just, eyeballing these pictures. Okay? Let me just ask everyone and you feel free to chat. No? Walang, di naman natin i-judge if your answers are wrong or correct.
Ay, Doc, ano
Yes.
po pala sa pediatric department lang po dumidiretso po yung mga chat po nung mga students.
Ganon.
Opo.
So who can be my chat? So I cannot also see the chat, no? Because I only see two. So who will be my chat monitor? How can I interact with you? Okay. So for the brave souls out there, okay, so wait, there's a chat here. Good morning, please answer po, Rosiola. Wait lang. Okay, so nakikita ko naman yung chat. Sa'yo, ikaw pala hindi nakakakita, Chris, no?
Yes po,
Or
Doc.
how do I call you? Chris Ann or what? What?
Okay lang po sa Chris.
Chris. Sige. Sige. So, answer kayo guys, ha? Answer, ha? So, because I see pala the chat. Okay? So, this one, no, the upper left-hand part, itong baby dito, no, na may maculopapular rash. What do you think this baby has? Just guess lang. Kasi hindi nyo pa naman alam, di ba? Guess lang. So, A, rubeola, B, rubella, C, roseola. No? So, let's see. Sino yung madaming sagot dyan? Oy, ba't alam nyo yan? Roseola. Uy, ang galing. Ba? So, kahit di kayo nanood ng lecture, may naiintindihan naman, right? I mean, then some of you answered rubeola or measles. Okay? Tingnan natin, no? What would be the differences, right? Okay. Now, what about the left hand lower part? The ones with almost the same rash, no? But it's really coalescent here, no? But we don't know the age group of this patient, eh. So most likely, no, what would this patient have? No, the left hand also part, no? But lower part. Sige nga. Sige na, no? Interact para lang, magising din kayo. And see, let's see. Okay. Rubeola. Okay, a lot more rubeola. No, not rubella pala. Letter B is rubella, no? Possibly A. Okay, rubeola. B. Okay. Okay. B. Okay, rubella. Okay, rubeola if coalescing. Wow. Kent. Galing, ah. I'm proud of you. Rubeola. Now, what about the one on the right-hand part? Also an infant, but kinda not. The rashes are also macular. But then they're not coalescent. They're like singles. They're isolated. They're discrete. Discrete types of rash. Okay? So rubella, okay. Rubella. Oy, kahit pala hindi kayo nag-aral, masasagot nyo naman, no? Kasi nakita nyo sa picture kanina. Okay. So let's see, no? Let's see. So what am I driving at here? What am I driving at here? Looking at these, no? Looking at these and just the type distribution of the rash, and if you see the age of the child on the left upper hand corner, and you would have clues in the diagnosis. We're not saying you can be 100% correct, but at least you would have more or less a better chance of getting your primary or your initial impression, no, based on just knowing the type and the distribution of the rash. So for that infant on the upper left-hand corner, this is your roseola, no? It's maculopapular. It can be a little bit map-like or coalescent or together, but because there's an infant there, then most likely roseola. But if you will be able to see the entire child, what you need to look for are the other prodromal symptoms. No? Remember, measles would have its prodrome, like your conjunctivitis. No? So if there's conjunctivitis, even if it's an infant, then it can be, no? Based on the appearance of the rash, can be measles, right? Because you don't know yet, no, the other aspects of the history. It's just looking at the picture. Okay? Now, the left lower hand part would actually be what? Your rubeola. We don't know the age. But rubeola classical would be a map-like coalescent type of a maculopapular rash. But as you will learn later, it does not stop at that in trying to differentiate or diagnose your measles or your rubeola. Okay? And then the right hand are discrete maculopapular rashes. Then this would be more characteristic of a rubella. Okay? Sige. So, moving on. Okay. Now, there are other viruses that would be presenting as influenza-like illness. So we kind of move away from the exanthems. No? We go now to most of the viral infections. And siguro before, no, we used to diagnose them because we don't know and we don't have the laboratory to back us up with. We don't, because before there was no dengue NS1 test, there was no like PCR, there was no chikungunya antigen or antibody detection test, no? There's no SARS rapid antigen or antibody detection test, no? All these are what we call influenza-like illnesses, meaning viral infections which would be presenting as fever with constitutional signs and symptoms such as myalgia, a little bit of joint pains, a little bit of headache, and then with a little bit of loss of appetite, meaning that's why we call it influenza-like illness, because that is the classical initial symptomatology of an influenza. And even our epidemiological assessment or documentation by the Department of Health, they would actually, for some of the illnesses, in their surveillance, would only look at influenza-like illnesses. Okay? And then RITM will do the confirmatory virology testing. Okay? But it can be reported in DOH as an influenza-like illness. Okay? So what I'm driving at here is that most of these viral infections would have okay, similar symptomatology at the onset. And again, it would be very helpful for you to be knowing what are the clues, what are the peculiar or unique features for each of these viral infections to help you out in your diagnosis or in your initial impression. Okay? Because again, as mentioned, they may present the same manner, similarly. The one is dengue, your chikungunya, or even your SARS. But as you go on the course of illness, then you will see certain pathognomonic features for dengue, like your hemoconcentration and eventually your thrombocytopenia, right? But the very first clue for dengue hemorrhagic fever would be your hemoconcentration, okay? Even without bleeding. Okay? Now, chikungunya presents the same way. It can also have a rash, but what would be more pathognomonic and more unique for chikungunya is the joint pains, more than the joint pains that you'd be feeling for influenza or for dengue. Okay? And then SARS-CoV, and then even where our COVID infection, no? Again, similarly, lalo ngayon, no? Like most of the children and even adults are vaccinated already against COVID, then the manifestation can just be simple fever, can just be influenza-like illness. Okay? And what can actually give you a hint was what? Loss of taste, loss of smell, or if there's nothing there, then really what can help you is the laboratory diagnosis. Okay? So, let's move on now to the cases. Tignan lang natin so I can see. Okay, so kikita ko naman yung chat eh. Wait, what's in the chat? Okay. So, this one, no? 10-year-old, 10-year-old girl was brought for consult because of vesicular lesions noted on the trunk. 2 days prior to consult, she was feeling warm with generalized body weakness. 1 day prior to consult, while scratching her nape area, she's able to, okay, ay, teka lang, ayan, she's able to feel a small vesicular lesion weeks prior to consult. She most likely has a hand-foot-mouth disease, varicella, echoviral infection, influenza. Sige nga, you're more than 300 in the class, so I'm expecting 300 responses here. Let's wait for the responses to come in. Don't expect you to be right. No? Don't be shy. Don't be scared to know you do not know anything, and be proud if you know it. No? It's your bragging rights to know that you're correct. Sige, let's see. Okay. Magalaw pa. Sige, go, go. Well, kung ganito naman pala, ipapasa kayo sa exam, no? Because you are able to, or because, ba may transcription ba tayo dyan? Okay. So for those of you who answered, no, 94% answered varicella. Okay? 94% answered varicella. Why? Why a varicella? Okay. What are the features that would point out to a varicella infection? Okay. So, chat. Okay. Ay, tatanggalin ko na nga itong poll. Bakit ba siya balik ng balik dito sa screen ko? Wait lang. Okay. So, 94% answered varicella. Why? Okay. Diba? Again, remember those 8 points. Character of the rash. It's vesicular. Okay? Sige. Ano dun sa 8 points ang nakikita nyo dito? Okay? Is there a prodrome? What is the kind of the prodrome here? Okay. There's no prodrome. It's just this patient just scratched her nape and she felt something there. And she felt a lesion. Right? And then exposure history. Huh? Exposure history. There was an exposure but they didn't say, right? Okay. Si Jade said, no? Varicella classic presentation, prodromal fever, Malay, exposure 2 weeks prior, pruritic vesicles on the rash. Correct, no? So this is a classic, no? I'm showing you a classic presentation of a varicella infection. Okay? This is the classic prodrome. Low-grade fever, just the patient just scratching something there on the back of the head, then felt a lesion. And that's the start. But this is just the start. So you have here your classic initial onset of a vesicular lesion. Okay? But what we need to also look for in this patient would how the rashes will progress. In a varicella infection, these rashes would start from the head, then go down until it reaches the feet. Okay? But as it goes down, okay, there are changes in the rashes that can be occurring. Okay? So it can start as a papule on the head. That was what was scratched by the 10-year-old girl. The papule will become a vesicle. That vesicle will now dry up and that vesicle will crust. Okay? So that lesion or that rash will evolve into eventually a crust until it falls off, okay? Until it heals. So crusted. So imagining a patient would already have crusting on the face, but would have vesicles on the trunk and would just have papules on the lower extremities. Okay? Because that is how it will evolve. And that is a classical example also of a varicella infection as it evolves. You would have the different stages of the rash in the entire body of the patient until such a time that everything becomes vesicular and everything crusts. Okay? So as you will learn later, it's not hand, foot, mouth because hand, foot, mouth, no, you would be looking for. Okay? So this is just, no, I am expecting that you were not able to listen to the lecture, so I put in here, no, some snippets of what you should be knowing for varicella. So it's a mild infection. It's in children who are immunocompetent. Then there would be generalized vesicular rash. Virtually there is no prodrome. And again, the first manifestation, no, can just be the exanthem. What is a classical vesicular lesion of a varicella disease is its teardrop. No? If you look closely here, it's a teardrop-shaped lesion. Okay? Compared to the other vesicular lesions that you'd be seeing in your patients. Okay. Okay. So next. Okay. Next. This one, no? Can we set the poll for this? So an 8-month-old girl was brought for follow-up because of maculopapular erythematous. Di pa tapos galing nyo naman. Wait lang. Rashes noted on the face and the trunk. So 3 days ago, she started to have high-grade fever at 40 degrees Celsius. Initial consult done on the second day. CBC was done revealing 3.5 WBC. Segmenters 22%, lymphocytes 78%, platelet count 250. At present, the patient's temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. Slightly irritable but otherwise non-toxic looking. She most likely has A. So let's see again. Oh, maganda to because it's a little bit of a mix of answers, no? So what you need to look for here, one again, is the type of the rash. Anong klaseng rash ba siya? Where did it start? What is its relation to fever? How is the baby? Okay. And then, well, on day of consult, because this is a follow-up, right? On the follow-up, I guess this is let's try to give it a little bit more this is pathognomonic for the course of illness. Now on this follow-up consult, the patient is already at 37 degrees centigrade temperature. So 3 days ago, started at 40.5 at this consult, diba? Ito, 37 degrees Celsius na siya. Okay. So, sabi ng lahat, well, mostly, okay, mostly 59% answered roseola and 20% answered rubeola, that's measles. Then rubella, 10%. And then erythema infectiosum is 10%. Sige. So, 50% versus 20%, no? Rubeola versus roseola, right? So, why is it not rubeola? Why is it not measles? Can you chat in the chat box? Why is it not measles? For those who answered roseola. Or why is it measles for those who answered measles? Why? Why? What's the pathognomonic course here that will tell you, although they're the same maculopapular rash, but they have different course of illness? Okay. Rashes appeared 3 days after onset of high-grade fever, according to Jasmine. And yes, according to Therese, fever initially presented, followed by decreased temperature, then rash was observed. Okay. So that is your classical roseola. And in an 8-month-old girl, okay? So an 8-month-old girl can also have measles. But the pathognomonic feature here is that for measles, if this were like a 3-day history or 4-day history, because at the day of consult, the patient has 37 degrees, okay? Then 3 days in history of measles, your fever is still there. Very still high fever. Okay. But if your fever starts to rise already on the day of consult and you don't have any of your prodromal symptoms, no, of cough, coryza, or conjunctivitis, then, okay, then the possibility of measles is lesser, no, compared to your roseola. Okay? So here, let's see. Okay. So as mentioned earlier on, cause is human herpes virus 6. And the classic presentation is mostly in infants 9 to 12 months. After 3 days, there's a rapid effervescence. But your treatment is supportive. Okay, so unlike varicella, wherein you have your vaccine, roseola does not have any vaccine. So roseola is not vaccine preventable. Okay? Sige. Next. Okay, case number 3. Previously healthy 4-year-old child, preschooler was brought to your clinic because of appearance of erythematous maculopapular rashes on the face, behind the ear. She had dry cough for 5 days associated with runny nose. On PE, she is highly febrile, tachycardic with normal respiratory rate, with non-purulent bilateral conjunctivitis. She most likely has. On dali na nito, di ba? You have what is now pathognomonic here. Also has maculopapular rash, but what will point to a particular initial impression? E. Oh, it's still moving. Okay. So, well, most of you are right. No? 77% said it's measles, no, or rubeola. Why? Because you have the classic prodrome here. You have maculopapular rash, right? What's your classic prodrome that's here? Can somebody, can anyone, no? Chat, no? Place in the chat. What's your classic prodrome here? Yeah, you have your cough, you have your runny nose, your 3 C's, no? Your 3 C's of measles is here, right? You're right, no? 3 C's of measles. Your cough, your coryza, your conjunctivitis, coupled with high-grade fever, coupled with a rash. From maculopapular rash that starts on the face and behind the ear. Okay? So, if we move forward here, the fourth C sounding is your Koplik spots. It's your enanthem, which is here in your buccal mucosa, no, behind your second molar. No? This is your classic. No? So if you see something or if you see somebody presenting as such, and when you do your physical examination, then you can look for the classical enanthem or your classical Koplik spots. Now, this is your conjunctivitis, which is different from what you have always known as sore eyes, because that's viral or bacterial conjunctivitis. It's usually purulent. For measles, it's a non-purulent conjunctivitis, but you will just see a red eye. Okay, and there might be tearing and the redness of the eyes there. Okay, and here you will see the classic maculopapular rash. And what's pathognomonic for the rash is its confluence. It is map-like. Okay, the confluence nature of the maculopapular rash. Now, what is pathognomonic in measles? Okay, is what we call your hyperpigmentation that you see on the left and the desquamation or the bronchodesquamation that you see on the right. Nagbabalat-balat. Okay? And this is the pathognomonic differentiation of measles compared to other viral exanthematous diseases. Okay? You may have the same, no? Sometimes, no? You can have like also in adenovirus, you can have your conjunctivitis, you can have your sore throat, you can have your maculopapular rash, you can have your fever. No? It might be, or even in your Kawasaki, no? But look, there's there's hyperpigmentation of the rash, and then there's desquamation. In Kawasaki, there might be desquamation, but there is no hyperpigmentation. Okay? So in history taking, because for the mummies, they treat all rashes as measles. Or some of the mummies call all rashes tigdas hangin. Or some mummies call all rashes as tigdas. What can make you diagnose is you can ask the mommy, Mommy, nangitim po ba? Was there any hyperpigmentation that occurred and nagdescome o nagbalat ba? Nag-scales ba? Okay. If the mommy says none, then most likely it is not measles. Okay? So tandaan niyo yan, no? Remember that. That's how you differentiate measles in terms of the rash compared to the other viral exanthems. Okay. Next, my vision or my wish list is for all of you to have 100% in the poll with the correct answer. Okay? Sige. So let's try. A 10-year-old girl who was brought to the pediatrician because of erythematous lace-like rashes on the trunk and extremities. Initially, she had low-grade fever, then had redness of the cheeks. Okay. She most likely has. Kasi ang hindi nyo pa naman naaral si Rubella, no? Pero naaral niyo si Rubiola at saka si Rosiola. Okay? So, let's see. Okay. So what is pathognomonic here? The lace-like rashes and the redness and that, that redness in the cheek. Okay. Gusto ba kayo? Okay. Okay. Ngayon, medyo 84%, no? A little bit of you answered rubella, no? 13% answered rubella. Let's see. Let's see. Okay. So what is this? This is what you call erythema infectiosum or slack cheek rash. Okay. So, ito talaga pathognomonic. When you see a baby, or when you see a patient, and ito nga maganda sila mag-family portrait because all of these would have like, red cheeks na parang there's like blush on there. It's very good in picture taking, in photos, no? But this is the classical, no? Lace-like rash. Okay, and then the slap cheek appearance. What is different for erythema infectiosum, or this is called the parvovirus disease, is that the prodrome, okay, the prodrome is like of influenza-like illness, okay, and then after the prodrome, there is a period of convalescence, okay, parang gumaling na yung pasyente. And after that convalescence period, no fever, nothing, then the rash will appear. It's like a week that the patient said, oh, the patient is well already of the flu-like illness, no? But then a rash will appear. Rash will appear like with a slap cheek, with a lace-like appearance. Then most likely, you are dealing with an erythema infectiosum. Okay? Now, What's also pathognomonic for erythema infectiosum, as you will see in this slide, is the third stage of the rash, wherein the rash may be persisting, but it may vary and fluctuate depending on environmental conditions, okay? Such as exposure to heat or sunlight. So for example, when you go inside an air-conditioned room, it may disappear. When you go out again, it can appear. Okay, so it fluctuates. That's how it is. The third stage of the rash for erythema infectiosum. Okay? Okay, next. Tapit na. 2-year-old boy was brought for consult because of fever and refusal to feed. He has 2 episodes of loose stools. On PE, temperature is 38.5 degrees centigrade, and on inspection of the throat, whitish circular lesions were seen. The physician also noted small pinpoint vesicular lesions of the hands and the feet, especially noted on the dorsal aspect. He most likely has, at least walang sumagot ng varicella, no? Because if you've answered varicella, I will kill you na. But, okay. But it's pretty, straightforward. No? Just by the name of the disease and where the lesions are, right? So, okay. Sige. So most of you, no, and I'm proud that most of you answered, 97%, okay, answered the correct one, hand, foot, mouth disease. And this is the classic presentation, no? But the baby will be brought to the clinic because of refusal to feed. Because the mommy will not see the lesion, right? Because it's in the mouth, not unless, no, the baby's crying and then the mommy sees the lesion there, or if there's really like lesions already outside, no, around the mouth area, around the oral area, then you can see that there's something there, no. But sometimes the baby's being brought to the clinic because of refusal to feed. And when you do your PE, you see those vesicles there, no, in the throat area. Okay? Do not stop at that, especially if you see vesicles in the oral or the buccal mucosa or in the tonsillar area. But it's mostly there in the buccal mucosa. It can be in the gums. It can be around the oral cavity, no? Perioral area. No? You don't just stop at that because you need to examine the hands and the feet. Because there are certain viral infections that are just located in the mouth. Can be herpes simplex, can be just, but look at the hands and the feet so that you can say, I'm dealing with a hand, foot, and mouth disease. So do not forget, no, physical examination is very crucial. Okay. Here, no, wait, I'll show you. Classic. Okay. So these are the lesions. So it can be there on the palate. It can be on the buccal mucosa. It can be on the tonsillar area. It can be perioral, no, near your vesicles. These are discrete. Sometimes, they can start off as macules there, no, with an erythematous base, but it can evolve into, no, it will evolve into a vesicle later on. Okay. So this is your mouth area. And then this is your hand and your feet area. So if you do something like that in the mouth, then please do your physical examination. Fine, this is very, it's classic already, no? But there can be just certain like 1 or 2 vesicles in the hand or 2 or 3 vesicles in the feet area. Okay. Now, typically the rash is papullovesicular, affecting the soles, the palms, and the soles of the feet. Okay. But it can also involve elbows, the knees, and even your buttocks. Okay, so you can also look at them, or look at the rashes in the buttocks. Okay, so classic hand, foot, mouth disease. Again, supportive, no, you will say, oh, but this causes an outbreak. This causes an outbreak, for example, in a nursery setting, in a classroom room type setting, no, because of direct contact, no. This is caused by your Coxsackie A, no, and um classical hand-foot-mouth disease. Your enterovirus 71 is the more complicated, no, type of the hand-foot-mouth disease, wherein you will have cardio, pulmonary, and even neurological complications. But it's kind of rare. No, in the pipeline for vaccines, then some countries would have had already a vaccine against hand, foot, and mouth disease, or an enterovirus 71 vaccine. It's already available in some countries. But in the Philippines, we do not have a vaccine yet against hand, foot, and mouth disease. Okay. So, okay, last na ba to? Or second to the last. No? 14-year-old girl. Ito na yung favorite ninyo eh. Kanina nyo pa to sinasagot. 14-year-old girl was brought for consult because of generalized maculopapular erythematous pruritic rashes noted 2 days ago. She also presented with low-grade fever. On PE, post-auricular and post-occipital nodes were palpated. There were no other associated symptoms. She most likely has Tama siyang slap cheek. Tama siyang lace-like. What she has is pruritic maculopapular rashes, which are erythematous. May desquamation ba siya? Wala naman. May hyperpigmentation ba yung rash niya? We don't know yet. But may prodrome ba siya? Is there traces here? Okay. So most of you answered rubella. Okay? Rubella. And this is the classical, no? It's rubella is mostly seen in children in the older age group. In the older age group. So 95% of you are correct. It's, and for adolescents, it may be more frequently seen in females compared to males. And for adolescents and even for young women, complication of arthritis may be found. Okay. But what is pathognomonic for rubella here would be the erythematous pruritic. No? Sometimes a rubella can be misdiagnosed as a hypersensitivity reaction because of the pruritic maculopapular rash. Okay? Because chickenpox or varicella is also pruritic, but it's vesicular. But rubella is maculopapular and it's also very pruritic. So sometimes it's misdiagnosed as a hypersensitivity reaction. But what is peculiar in this physical examination finding is your post-auricular and your post-occipital node that's palpated. Okay? And the absence of a prodrome. Okay? So these are the classic features, right? So you can have your enanthem, as I have mentioned earlier on, which you call your Forsheimer spots. It's a 3-day rash. It's a maculopapular discrete. See the picture here? Unlike measles, which is map-like and coalescent, rubella or German measles rash is discrete. It's in singles, but it's also maculopapular with no or very, very little prodrome. Okay. But the classic or peculiar PE finding that you should be looking for would be the cervical lymphadenopathy or the post-auricular lymphadenopathy. Okay. So this is your Forsheimer spots, and this would be, if you look at the picture of the infant, your enlarged neck lymph nodes. Okay. Again, can be retroauricular, post-auricular, post-cervical, or post-occipital. Evident 24 hours before the rash and remaining for 1 week or more. Okay. Last in these viruses would be a 15-year-old female or a male consulting at the clinic because of fever of 4 days with generalized body weakness and arthralgia. So now we're moving on into the influenza-like illness. Diba? So sabi natin, it usually starts out with fever and then with a little bit of your constitutional signs and symptoms. Now what you need to look for in your history and even in your physical examination would be the clues and the associations of a particular disease. Okay, so here you have a 4-day history of fever associated with a generalized macular rash. So may rash din siya, right? The few hours prior to consult, experiencing joint pain, especially on the knee joint. Okay. Which among these patients or with these diseases will be most appropriate for the patient's condition? Okay. It's a toss-up. We don't know. We don't have any laboratory. But just by history, no? As we always say in pediatrics, 90% of your diagnosis would come from your history and your physical examination findings. Okay? So, sige nga. Okay. So, dito, tingnan natin, no? Bakit siya ba? Dengue ba siya? Bakit chikungunya ba siya? What would be, classic? Or can be influenza, right? It can be just simple influenza. Because it's influenza-like illness. Anyway. Okay. So majority answered chikungunya. Okay, let's see, no? Let's see. So why? It's a toss-up, no? Your number 2 answer is dengue, no? 72% answered chikungunya, and then 23% of you answered dengue. Okay. But before I show this slide, sige nga, why chikungunya, no? Let's look at the chat box. Or why dengue? Let's see. Dengue, muscle pain, bleeding risk. Okay, Jade. Chikungunya, crippling joint pain. Okay. No? So what made it chikungunya in this, ano? You're right, no? What made it chikungunya in this patient? A 4-day history of fever with a rash. Can it be just a simple, what? It can be rubella? Can it be rubeola? Can it be? No? But you're right, no? It's chikungunya. And biphasic ang fever ng dengue. Oh, nice. Sean, very good, no? Joint involvement with arthralgia, no? With Angelo saying, no? Then Therese, okay. Okay. Acute onset of high-grade fever with arthralgia. Okay. So, yes, and they will look at just pathognomonic difference, no? Pathognomonic difference. Let's see. It's actually difficult to distinguish. And sometimes, most of the time, you would be needing your laboratory. No? We're saying it's chikungunya primarily because of the joint involvement. Okay? And we know that chikungunya and dengue are actually transmitted by the same mosquito. Okay? It's your Aedes. Okay? The viruses can circulate, it's the same vector, can circulate in the same area and cause occasional co-infections in the same patient, no? And it muddles up the diagnosis, right? Now, clinically, no, patients with suspected chikungunya is managed or should be managed as dengue until dengue has been ruled out. Because dengue is a more severe symptom. It's a more severe type of disease. Okay. So what would be the difference? Chikungunya, more likely to cause high-grade fever with severe polyarthralgia, arthritis, rash, and lymphopenia. Dengue, on the other hand, with the same high-grade fever, can have a little bit of arthralgia, no? Because you would have that myalgia, no? That severe myalgia associated with dengue fever. Also have your neutropenia, but what would be more pathognomonic would be your hemoconcentration, no? Your increase in hematocrit, your hemoconcentration, and eventually your thrombocytopenia, which may or may not be seen in chikungunya. No, but your hemoconcentration is the one which is pathognomonic for your dengue. Okay. And as in, okay, so just a little bit more pearls for you to think about. So now how do you distinguish dengue from influenza? Again, both presents with influenza-like illnesses. Okay. For influenza, once your fever lyses, you are done. The patient is well and good and up and about. Okay. In dengue, once your fever lyses, your critical phase is just setting in. Because once that fever lies, that is what we call the critical phase, and that is where we see the complications of dengue. The bleeding, the shock, the hemoconcentration. This is where we see. Okay. The first 48 hours of being a febrile in dengue is your critical phase. Okay. So if you have a patient coming into you with the mommy saying, Doctora, this patient had 4 days of fever. Now you just not have fever anymore, but she's feeling worse compared to when she was having fever. Then just by history alone, then you can say most likely, I need a CBC and platelet count for this patient. But for a patient with a 4-day history of fever, and then on the 5th day, the fever lyses and the patient is up and about and well, then just maybe plain and simple influenza only. Okay. So to cap off this viral infection lecture or case discussion, then I just want to show you the childhood immunization schedule, because a lot of the viral infections are vaccine preventable. You have your influenza, you have your measles, your measles, mumps, and rubella, you have your varicella, and maybe in your in gastro, you learn about hepatitis A. You'd learn about rabies, supposedly, HPV, so human papilloma virus. These are vaccine preventable. Your rotavirus is vaccine preventable. There are a lot of viruses that are vaccine preventable. And this childhood immunization schedule is the one which is recommended by the local society that our children should be having. Now, for you as medical students, what you would be needing would be, before you get into the wards or before you get your exposures, would be your MR, your varicella, and your influenza, and even your Japanese encephalitis vaccine. You have your Japanese encephalitis virus vaccine. Okay. So the schedules of this is in the lecture, no? So you can learn the actual schedule and the actual dosing regimen in the lecture. Okay. Now, moving on to sepsis. Now we have 40 minutes. Moving on to sepsis. Okay. Chat away your questions in the chat box if you have any this point. Okay. So sepsis. What I want you to realize in sepsis, and to reinforce what you will be learning from your video or from your lecture, would be, one, sepsis is a medical emergency, meaning you do not need anything at all. It's just your history, your PE, your initial impression that you're dealing with sepsis that would make you, or that would prompt you or necessitate you, mandate you actually, to treat, to give your initial empiric antibiotic treatment, because it is a medical emergency. Because once you're late, then it's very difficult. to actually have have that patient come out of that septic shock. If it's like a multi-organ dysfunction already, it's very difficult to pull that patient out. Okay. Now, in terms of diagnosis, sepsis, no, you always think of what am I dealing with here? Oh, yeah. So this is more or less dealing with an infection. I'm dealing with the sepsis. I'm dealing with something which is probably bacterial. Okay. But what is my targeted pathogen? What is my likely etiologic agent? And how can I come up with my likely etiologic agent? Am I dealing with an infant? Am I dealing with a child? Am I dealing with an older child? And I'm dealing with an adolescent, because the age can somehow give you certain clues also again to a diagnosis. What about my immunization history? Because some of these etiologic agents are vaccine preventable, such as pneumococcus, such as H. influenzae type B, such as meningococcus. No, these are vaccine preventable. Okay? Now, what's the site of infection? Am I dealing with the blood? Am I dealing with the urinary tract? So so you think about what's the most common etiologic agent for a urinary tract infection? Is it Staphylococcus? No. Well, is it E. coli? Possibly, right? So you think of where the infection is. And your empiric antimicrobial treatment would be highly dependent on this, highly dependent on the kind of etiologic agent that you would be thinking of based on the age and based on your host factors. So in looking at the patient and in looking at the case, these are the certain things that you should be asking yourself. What's the age of the patient? What is the site of the infection? Are there any host factors that are involved? Am I dealing with an immunocompetent patient? And am I dealing with an immunocompromised patient? Does this patient have malignancy? Does this patient have asplenia? Okay? Or what is the immunization history of my patient? Okay? So these are things that you should be asking yourself and looking for in the history of your patient. Okay? Now, just to show you a little bit of the etiology beyond the neonatal period. Okay, alam niyo na yan. Ano yun, you will have your own newborn discussion. No, but beyond the neonatal period, then common etiologic agents, otherwise healthy children, would be your Streptococcus pneumoniae, your Neisseria meningitis, and your H. influenzae type B. Okay? But here, no, in non-immunized children, yeah, because as I've mentioned earlier on, these etiologic agents are vaccine preventable. What about for hospitalized infants and children? You won't be thinking about Streptococcus pneumoniae because this is community acquired. No? For hospital acquired infections, then you think more of your coagulase negative staphylococci, your in that family, including your Klebsiella E. coli. These are your Enterobacteriaceae family. Then your Pseudomonas, or even your gram-positive organisms like your coagulase negative staph and your Staphylococcus aureus, and your fungal infections. Okay? And those children with underlying immunodeficiency, okay, that are associated with certain immunodeficient conditions, okay, such as, for example, for patients with malignancies, for patients with neutropenia, you think of a gram-negative bacteria. Okay? For those with AIDS or even for severe immunosuppression due to HIV, you think of a lot more. You can even think CMV, you can even think TB. Okay? Now, functional or anatomic asplenia, then you think of encapsulated microorganisms such as Streptococcus pneumoniae, your H. influenzae type B, and your Neisseria meningitis. Okay? Okay. Now, without focus, you don't know where it is. Empiric treatment, clinical sepsis without focus. So here, your guide is your national antibiotic guidelines. This is downloadable in the internet. This is the protocol that we look at. If you really want to know the empiric treatment based on the most likely etiologic agent and the most likely type of infection. Okay. So clinical sepsis without focus, you don't know, but you said, oh, this might be sepsis. So Streptococcus pneumoniae, Staph aureus, H. influenzae B, or meningococci, or Neisseria meningitidis. Okay. What would be the empiric treatment? Ceftriaxone, Cefotax with or without oxacillin or vancomycin, depending on the type of etiologic agent that you are thinking of. But again, and as I've mentioned earlier on and keep on reinforcing, you have to check on immunization status because some of these bacteria are vaccine preventable, such as your pneumococcus and your H. influenzae, and even your meningococcus. Okay. Now, sepsis in an immunocompetent child, but you're dealing with the UTI. Sabi natin kanina, it's very important for us to know the site of infection. And for urinary tract, these are your most common etiologic agents. Your Enterobacteriaceae family, which includes your E. coli, or it can also involve Pseudomonas or your Enterococcus. And these are your treatment regimen. You can start off with the third generation cephalosporin plus an aminoglycoside at 10 to 14 days. Remember, this is sepsis. This is sepsis. This is not a common UTI. This is sepsis secondary to urinary tract source. Okay, that's why you are coming up with a third generation already cephalosporin. It's a different story when you're just dealing with a simple local urinary tract infection. Okay. Thank you. Okay. What about intra-abdominal source in an immunocompetent child? Sepsis secondary to an intra-abdominal source. Okay. And your etiology, because it's in the abdomen, if you have an infection in the abdomen, then you would be thinking of a gram-negative inside the abdomen and your anaerobes. Gram-negatives here would be your Enterobacteriaceae and your Pseudomonas. Your anaerobe will be your Bacteroides, but you have a gram-positive here also lurking around, which is your Enterococci. Okay? That's why in your empiric treatment, you will need to have a broader spectrum of antimicrobial that would be hitting, if it's an empiric treatment, that would be hitting a gram-positive, a negative, and an anaerobe. Okay? Post-splenectomy, immunocompetent, this is immunocompromised, sorry. This should be immunocompromised child. Post-splenectomy, functional asplenia. Now, again, as mentioned, encapsulated microorganisms such as strep, H. flu, and Neisseria. And your drug of choice is a third generation cephalosporin because this is sepsis, right? Ceftriaxone or cefotaxime. Okay? So yun lang, no? A little bit of sepsis encapsulated lecture for you before you actually read or listen to your video of your lecture. Then what about healthcare-associated sepsis? As mentioned, this is mostly secondary to gram-negative bacilli and your staphylococcus or your gram-positive. So, in any of the kinds of infection that you have, whether it's community acquired or hospital acquired, the choice of empiric antibiotic treatment based on etiologic agent should be based on the current antimicrobial susceptibility pattern within that particular place or that particular institution. If it's a hospital patient and you are, for example, at UARM, then there is such a hospital surveillance, no? Antimicrobial susceptibility pattern surveillance that you can look for. So if Dr. Jack and Dr. Honey knows of, no, the usual pathogens that they have in the nursery, in the NICU, in the PICU, in the general ward. You know that. You know that most common etiologic agent, and you know which antibiotics would actually be resistant or susceptible to the more common pathogens seen in your institution. And that's where you should be coming from when you look at empiric treatment in healthcare associated sepsis and even in your community acquired infections. Okay? So since this is gram-negative bacilli and Staph aureus, then you start off with an empiric treatment that would cover your gram-negative bacilli, and that would be your third or fourth generation cephalosporin, or your extended spectrum beta-lactam, beta-lactamase inhibitors such as your piperacillin, tazobactam, with or without with or without aminoglycoside, or if you're dealing with a methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, with or without vancomycin, for your MRSA. Okay? So, simplihan lang natin. Okay. Severe sepsis and septic shock preferred regimen. This is from the National Antibiotic Guidelines. Piperacillin, tazobactam, or meropenem plus this is empiric. Okay? As mentioned earlier, it can be a gram-negative pathogen. It can be a Staphylococcus aureus, which is methicillin resistant, or what we call MRSA. Okay? If it's bacteremia, then you have such a dose. Okay? If it's meningitis, then you would have a higher dose for that. Okay? And the type of antibiotic would also, no, remember, be dependent on the site of infection. So you should also be knowing in your pharmacology, I'm sure you were taught this, that some of the antibiotics do not penetrate the blood-brain barrier or has poor penetration in the blood-brain barrier. That's why for meningitis, you should be choosing the antibiotic that would actually be penetrating your blood-brain barrier. And in this choice, no, in severe sepsis and septic shock from the National Antibiotic Guideline, for meningitis, the more appropriate choice would be a meropenem compared to a piperacillin tazobactam, which is a poorer penetration to your blood-brain barrier. Okay? Okay, now we move on to application. So just a snapshot. Now we move on to application. This time, a 15-year-old who had splenectomy, so a splenic patient, no? Because of vehicular accident, no? Experiencing high-grade fever for the past 3 days. He appears toxic and is not eating and dehydrated. He is tachypnic, tachycardic, and his BP is 90/60. He has exposure to a granddad with pneumonia. His CBC at the ER suggested a bacterial etiology with toxic granulation. Oh, blood CS was ordered. So, septic nga siya, no? May toxic granulation. You think he might be having sepsis. Which empiric antibiotic treatment will you give? Okay. So immunocompromised child, asplenic. So again, think of, okay, what are the more common etiologic agents for a patient without a spleen? Okay. And what would be my drug of choice? Okay. Kasasabi lang natin yan, di ba? May table tayo dyan. Sepsis eh. Right? Okay. So for those who are done, can you please write in the chat box what are the etiologic agents that are associated with a patient with asplenia? Etiologic agents of patients with asplenia. Tingnan nga natin kung tama kasi yan, tama yung sagot nyo, right? Splenic patients, viral, Juju, yes, tama. Sama si Jade, no? Okay. Strep pneumoniae, H. influenzae, encapsulated organisms, right? Angelo, Nicole, Jay, Therese, Rennie. Okay, so the answer should be a ceftriaxone. No, a third generation cephalosporin. No? Majority of you answered 78. No, 78% answered the ceftriaxone. No? So you know that's how you analyze a case. No? Well, 9% answered penicillin, 12% answered ampicillin. Okay, but majority still, no, got the correct answer at 78% ceftriaxone. Okay, but that's how you would analyze a case. How old is this patient? What is the most common etiologic agent for this age? But this patient has no spleen. So what is the most common etiologic agent for an asplenic patient? And this patient most likely has sepsis. So what am I dealing with? So I need to cover for strep pneumonia, I need to cover for H. influenzae, I need to cover for Neisseria meningitis. But what would I also be needing in history? Worthwhile for me to look at also immunization history. Because if the question is what is the most common etiologic agent you are dealing with, then you have to look at the history. If my choices were Streptococcus pneumoniae, H. influenzae, Salmonella species, and then your Neisseria meningitidis, then you have to look at immunization history. If this patient is vaccinated against strep and an H. influenzae, and possibly or most likely we are dealing with a meningococcemia, but still, the empiric treatment would remain the same with ceftriaxone. Okay? Okay. Eto naman, 12-year-old girl. So definitions of sepsis. Okay, definitions of sepsis. Let's look at the definitions. 12-year-old girl was brought to the emergency room because of high-grade fever of 1 day with noted petechial rashes over the face and purpuric stellate rashes on the extremities. PE revealed a highly febrile child with temperature of 39 degrees, heart rate of 120 per minute, RR of 30, CBC revealed anemia with leukocytosis and neutrophilia. Patient is awake but disoriented. Extremities are cold to touch. So how would you interpret this blood pressure? Urine output was reported to be 8 hours ago. The patient most likely has A. Septic shock, severe sepsis. Okay. Parang ito, iba-iba no? Okay. Okay. It's a toss-up. Well, septic shock is winning, but it's a toss-up between SIRS or SIRS, sepsis, and severe sepsis. Okay, let's see. Let's hold that thought. Let's see. Okay, let's see and let's hold that thought. No? Hold that thought. Okay. Okay. Balikan natin ang mga definition natin. No? Balikan natin. Okay. Sabi natin, pag SIRS, no, this is the International Consensus Definition of Sepsis. No? Pag SIRS, it's generalized inflammatory response defined by the presence of more than two of the following 4 criteria. 1, abnormal core temperature, abnormal heart rate, a raised respiratory rate, and these are more than dapat 2 standard deviations above or normal for age or less than 10th centile for age. No? If the child is less than 1 year old. No? And then abnormal white cell count, above or below normal range for age, or more than 10% is immature white cells. This is SEERS. Okay. So this is more temperature rise, more tachycardia, this is tachypnea, and this is abnormality in your WBC. Now, what about infection? An infection is saying that there's a proven or a suspect or a proven something, no, infect caused by a pathogen. See, it's a broad term. It's a broad term. An infection with culture positive microorganism, okay, should be done, right? There should be an evidence of an infection that you should be looking for, right? So infection, you know that there's something there. Okay? There is an etiologic agent there, but it's a broad term. It can be proven, it cannot be proven. Okay? Sepsis is SIRS in the presence of or as a result of a suspected infection. Okay. So meaning the tachycardia, the tachypnea, the WBC count, okay, the low blood pressure count is secondary to an infectious process. That is what you call sepsis. Okay. Clinical sepsis, if you are just giving a clinical diagnosis. Proven sepsis, if you have a positive blood culture already, or depending on where the site of infection is causing the septicemia. Okay. But it's just telling us that SEERS plus an infection is called sepsis. Okay? Is that clear? Okay. Now, you have severe sepsis already if you have certain organ dysfunctions already, such as sepsis plus one of the following: cardiovascular dysfunction, acute respiratory distress syndrome, or more than or equal to 2 organ dysfunctions. Okay? So again, severe sepsis plus these 2 other organ dysfunctions. Okay? Kasi meron ng ibang organ involvement. Hindi lang infection, hindi lang sepsis na okay, but I'm good. I don't have any renal problem. I don't have any cardiovascular problem, right? Okay. Now, it's called septic shock when in children with severe infection leading to cardiovascular dysfunction, including hypotension, and there is a need for treatment with a vasoactive medication or impaired perfusion. Okay? So, again, including hypotension, needing a treatment with a vasoactive medication. Kailangan mo ng idopamine, kailangan mo ng epinephrine, mga ganyan. Kailangan mo na ng infusion, meaning you need like boluses of IV fluids to be able to pull that patient out of the hypotensive episode. Okay. So balikan natin ngayon yung tanong ko. Pwede ba nating balikan at sumagot ulit? Okay? Now, can we answer again? Can we do the poll again ba? Aldrin or whoever is the host, can we do the poll again or no more na because it has been answered? If we cannot do the poll again, ayan, we can do the poll again. Okay. Now, knowing now the definitions of sepsis, what would be so again, this patient has, and what will be the clues in the diagnosis for this patient would be what? It's more than temperature is high, heart rate is high, RR is high, your CBC is high, so definitely there is SIRS, right? But there is something else apart from that. There's purpuric stellate, there's petechial rash, something going on. It's SIRS plus infection. Because you have something there. But on your PE, so definitely you have sepsis, SIRS plus infection, because you already have your petechial rashes, you have your purpuric stellate rashes on the extremity. Your patient is disoriented. Your PE, this patient is cold to touch. On top of that infection, then you have certain physical examination findings pointing to organ dysfunction, right? So what are the organ dysfunctions that you are looking at? Then you have a little bit of your neurologic because you are disoriented. This patient is disoriented already. Okay. This patient is cold to touch. This patient has narrowing of the pulse pressure at BP of 70/50. And is this normal for a 12-year-old girl with a BP of 70/60? So what do you have here? Okay? So mas lumiliwanag na, di ba? Because you have your sears, plus you have an infectious process, plus you have an organ dysfunction, plus you have a cardiovascular dysfunction, specifically hypotension, needing a impaired or needing an infusion, needing and for example, maybe a bolus of your IV fluids, no, at an initial onset. So this patient is already in septic shock, because you already hypotensive, your patient is cold, clammy, you have your cold extremities already necessitating your bolus of your IV fluids. Okay. Refractory septic shock is when you did everything, you've done your IV boluses, and yet you cannot pull out that patient from shock. That's why you need other medications. Okay? So, mas maliwanag. Okay. Now, okay, last. Ito ang pinakamadali, di ba? Defined as the presence of an abnormal temperature and a white cell count. Pag ito, hindi kayo 100%, lagot kayo sa akin. Ako hindi nga, ba? Kasi merong ibang sumasagot iba. Eh, may organ dysfunction ba siya? Ang kanyang ano lang one, abnormal temperature lang and white cell. Okay? Okay? Let's see. Hmm. Okay, so more or less 91% answered SIRS, no? Because there's nothing there, no? There's nothing there. Ay, sorry. What happened there? Okay. There's nothing there, right? There is this nothing in the history actually. This is just plain and simple definition of Ed Sears. Okay? No organ dysfunction mentioned. No possible signs of infection here. Okay. So I'll stop sharing. And then let's look at each other. And we have 10 minutes to go. And did it help you? It would have been better if you've already listened to the lecture, but I hope um you know you had a certain overview already of the more common, this is your must knows, no? The more common viral exanthematous diseases and the more common viruses that you'd be dealing with in clinical practice. So at this point in time, happy to answer some questions from the group if you have any. Or anyone who would want to ask, just unmute yourself. So wala ba? Shy kayong lahat? So are we good? So see you next week for the part 2 of infectious, what would I mean? Parasitism. No? So hopefully you can. No? Hopefully you're able to view the lecture already on parasites and I think disaster related, no? Disaster related diseases. Okay? So Aldrin, I'm good. Okay not to go? Jack?
Hi, ma'am. Thank you
Yeah.
very much for your expertise and time for today's lecture. See you again
See
next
you
week, ma'am, for
next week.
the parasitism and disaster-related diseases.
Okay. Sige, sige. So, sabi mo sa akin kung ilan questions ng exam. Dapat, majority of them actually were able to, in fairness to them, Jack, no? I mean, even if they were not able to, then they were able,
Opo.
majority is able to answer naman, no, the questions. Konti
Yes,
pa,
ma'am.
konti pa. When you
Majority
listen to
nga,
the
ma'am.
lecture,
Opo.
no? So I'm happy with that, no? Mas mafa-frustrate kasi ako kung talagang walang knowledge. But fair enough for these students. They're very good because majority of them got the correct answers. So for those who did not, then, try a little bit, study a little bit more. Kasi hindi naman pa nila naaral talaga.
Opo.
Sige. Okay, so bye-bye.
Bye,
And
ma'am. Thank
see you
you.
next week.
Reminding our students po to evaluate our lecture for today. Thank you.
Ano nga
Thank
ba
you
ako
po.
nag-leave? Hindi ko makita yung leave. Sige.
Baka sa right
Ayan.
upper.
Oo nga, tama. Hindi, left upper.
Left
Okay.
upper sa'yo. Bye,
Okay, bye-bye.
ma'am.
Recording stopped.